right, Christmas is a time when we focus our attention on baby Jesus, isn't it? And we saw a lot of babies there and young people. But today, Dr. Luke, in his book, gives us a glimpse into the child Jesus. Did you see that in the passage that Phil read to us? Into the childhood of Jesus. In fact, do you know that this is a unique record of the 12-year-old Jesus Christ in the Bible? It's the only time we meet the 12-year-old Jesus, and Luke records it for us. Luke records it for us in Luke chapter 2 and verses 41 to 52 that we're going to spend some time thinking about this morning. And the big idea, I think, of what we see in the passage this morning is this. The big idea is this, that we see in the life of a 12-year-old Jesus, is that he knows who he is. He knows who he is, what he's come to do. So the question is, how about you? That's the question that this text will ask us today. Jesus knows who he is. He knows what he's come to do. So how about you? Do you know who you are? And do you know what you're here for? Let's have a look at that passage together. The key verse I would suggest for you in chapter 2, 41 to 52 is verse 49. We can see that idea in verse 49 where Jesus says to his parents, "Why are you looking for me? Do you not know that I must be in my Father's house? I must be in my Father's house. I know who I am. I know what I've come to do." Now we pick up the context of these verses in 41 to 52 in the temple. We find ourselves in the temple in the city of David. That's what we see in verse 11. That's what Luke tells us about the context in verse 11. And Phil read to us in 2 Samuel chapter 7 a message that was told to David, to King David, many years before. Do you remember those words spoken to King David? When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. That was the prophecy that was given to King David. From him would come one who would establish the kingdom of God forever. And we read in verse 14 those words, God speaking to King David about the coming king. I will be his father, and he will be my son. I will be his father, and he will be my son. Bearing that in mind, notice with me just three things. Firstly, a distressing incident. Notice a distressing incident in verses 41 to 45 of chapter 2. You can read it there in the Bible in front of you. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover. And when he was about 12 years old, they went up according to the custom. 12 years have passed since we met the baby Jesus that we talked about on Thursday, on Christmas Day. 12 years have passed. The family are based up north in Nazareth, but every year they travel south to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover festival. That reminded them of God's saving acts way back in Exodus. Do you remember in the Exodus, in the Old Testament, what happened? God visited his wrath upon the Egyptians, his enemies. But he spared all whose houses had the blood of the lambs on their doorposts. The angel of death passed over that place, killed the firstborn of all who were not covered, and marked with the blood of the Lamb. The blood of the Lamb. And at this time, everybody gathered in Jerusalem. That's the context. to celebrate and to remember God's rescue. God's rescue way back in the Exodus. What did he do? He rescued from slavery in Egypt. He rescued for freedom in the Promised Land by his chosen servant Moses. From, for, by. That's always a good thing to remember, because Jesus rescues us from slavery to sin, for freedom to serve God and look forward to the Promised Land of heaven by his chosen servant, Jesus. Do you see, the Exodus is really just a picture of Jesus and his saving work on the cross for us. But we read here in the context that it's a big event. Every year, his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. It's a big event. There's lots of people. And we read in verse 43, a distressing incident. After the feast was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it, thinking he was in their company. They traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him amongst their relatives and friends, and when they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. Have you ever been lost? I wonder, have you ever been lost? I can remember a story as a youngster walking in a shopping centre with my parents, perhaps even around Christmas time, and my dad was here and my mom was next to him and I was here, and I remember seeing them there, and I looked to the right and something caught my attention, and I looked at that and I carried on walking, and we were walking. Next time I looked back and I looked, and the guy next to me was not my dad anymore. He was some stranger. And it was quite a shock, because my mom and dad had sort of stopped back there and I'd carry on walking and hadn't paid attention. And I remember even now looking and going, oh, who are you? Looking around, and that feeling of angst, that feeling of nervousness, that feeling of being lost. Where am I? Where are my parents? From that day, they got one of these little doggy lead things. Do you know the ones they had there? And they had the things. Do you remember those ones? And they clipped them on the back, and I was on that for the rest of until I was, I don't know. That's cruel nowadays. You're not allowed to do that, aren't you? Have you seen those ones? Hey, really? Oh, right. Well, I had one of those. I remember having one of those and being on it. Maybe it was because of that. I don't know. But it was my youngest memory of being lost. And it was distressing for me, and I think it was for my parents, I hope. We eventually were reunited and we found each other. But can you imagine being Mary? Can you imagine the situation? Can you imagine it? It must have been distressing for Mother Mary. Can you imagine her thinking these words? I've lost the one who Zechariah called the horn of salvation for the house of David in chapter 1, 68 to 75. I've lost the one who the angels called Christ the Lord in chapter 2 and verse 11. I've lost the one who Simeon said, of whom Simeon said, for my eyes have seen the salvation which you have prepared in the sight of all people, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, as we heard on Sunday. Can you imagine all these things going through her head? Never mind her saying, I've lost my son. I've lost my son. And so they had traveled away for a day in the caravan, and that's potentially a lot of people, they tell us. Anyway, they realized they traveled back to Jerusalem, and then they spent another day searching for him. 3 days had elapsed, and so we read in verse 46, after 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting amongst the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Verse 47, everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. And verse 48, when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you. A distressing incident. But notice an amazing dialogue. Notice an amazing dialogue in verses 46 to 49. 46 to 49. Now I wonder, what would most 12-year-olds be doing at this time? What would most 12-year-olds be doing? I would have been, yes, Vincent? I like that. I can always count on Vincent for a good answer. Usually Carlo and Miko as well. But that's a great answer. Playing video games, good answer. Any others? I would have been in the lolly shop, or yes, freaking out. You would have been freaking out. Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one. You would have been playing video games, right? Okay. You can think of all sorts of things that a 12-year-old would be doing. But Jesus is in a dialogue with the teachers of the law. That's probably not what most 12-year-olds would be doing. He's in a dialogue with the teachers of the law. Have a look at verse 47. It's an amazing dialogue, isn't it, in verse 47? Sorry, is it verse 47? And all who heard him, over the page, 47, and everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. Isn't that incredible? A 12-year-old. You see, Luke goes on, isn't it interesting, not to record the content of that dialogue, but notice what he does record. He doesn't record the content. Wouldn't we love to have heard what Jesus was dialoguing, what he was saying? It would have been incredible to be a fly on the wall of that conversation, and that dialogue would have been wonderful. But Luke doesn't record that for us. Very interesting. But what he does is focuses on the relationship between Jesus and Mary. Have a look at verse 48. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." Verse 49. Why were you searching for me? What an amazing answer. He asked, "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying. "Didn't you know that I had to be in my father's house?" What an answer from a 12-year-old to his parents. Now, if you have a look at the bottom of your Bibles, there's a bit of a footnote, or maybe you're in the King James, or maybe you're in the ESV. That's great. You'll see that Luke chapter 2 and verse 49, Luke chapter 2 and verse 49 can also be translated, "or about my Father's business." Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house, or about my Father's business? It can be translated either of those. In my Father's house, or about my Father's business. Do you see the intimacy that Jesus has with God? He calls him his Father. He calls him his Father. And he says, I must be about his business. I must be about his business. You see, Jesus understands who he is and what he's come to do. Verse 50. And they didn't understand the saying that he spoke to them, and he went down with them to Nazareth and was submissive to them. Jesus would go on to submit to his parents for the next 17 years. Isn't that wonderful? God incarnate, who knows God as his Father and his mission, but yet he submits to his parents. An amazing dialogue, and lastly, a treasured memory. Have a look with me at verses 50 to 52. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. Not the first time she did that. Have a look at verse 19. We read it on Thursday. But Mary treasured all these things and pondered them in her heart. A treasured memory. You see, Mary didn't necessarily understand all of these things, but she did not dismiss them. She did not dismiss them Rather, these incidents were precious to her, and she took them on board and pondered them. So as we finish today, what are we to make of this account? What are we to make of this account? Why did Luke record it in his passage? And why not, like all the other gospel writers, just overlook those early days of the life of Jesus Christ? Well, turn back to chapter 1 of Luke. Turn back to chapter 1 of Luke. And just read with me verses 1 to 4 of chapter 1. 1 to 4 of chapter 1. It's the purpose statement of Luke's gospel. And Luke writes, "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled amongst us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to me to write an orderly account for you, the most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught." You see, Luke wants a guy called Theophilus to have certainty about the things that he has been taught about Jesus Christ. Luke investigated them, and he recorded them for Theophilus and perhaps even for us today as we sit here. So what might Theophilus have understood, and what might we understand today from this unusual and unique account? Firstly, I want to suggest understand the mission of Jesus. Understand the mission of Jesus. No doubt Luke would want Theophilus to understand that, and perhaps even you and I today. Understand the mission of Jesus. You see, Mary and Joseph didn't understand it first, but as time passed and they heard his words and saw his works, they would have come to understand. They would have come to understand. Luckily for us, his words and his works are recorded in the Bible so that we can understand today. We just need to read the Bible. And perhaps today there is an invitation to you here to read the Bible about Jesus. In the year ahead, we stand here on the last Sunday of 2025, 2026 will be the next time we meet, next Sunday. Maybe commit to reading Luke's Gospel this year, a chapter a day, to exploring who Jesus is and his mission. Maybe that's something you need to commit to today. An invitation to read on in Luke's Gospel in the year ahead. We've started today. Just keep reading with that in mind. Because, have a think of this, if a 12-year-old could say such things, then just imagine what he goes on to do as he grew up. You see, if you're not yet a Christian here today, perhaps you haven't heard about Jesus. You'll be amazed what you come to see Jesus say and do in the rest of Luke's book. And I'd encourage you to accept the invitation to read a chapter a day and come to see the real Jesus. Understand the mission of Jesus, and secondly, understand the uniqueness of Jesus. I think that may have been what Luke wanted Theophilus and us to understand. Understand the uniqueness of his birth. We've seen that over the last over the last week. Understand the uniqueness of his relationship with God. With God. The uniqueness of his mission and ministry. See, Jesus is unique. There is no one like him. There is no one like him. And he goes on to be our Passover lamb. He's not one of many, but he is unique. These are his claims. If you don't like it, take it up with him. But he is unique. He's not one of many, but unique. Only He calls God His Father. No one else does that. Only He rises from the dead. And only He is ascended to sit at the right hand of His Father. Because He is unique. So understand that, and lastly, understand the example of Jesus. Understand the example of Jesus. Perhaps that's what Luke would have wanted of Theophilus, and maybe even for us here today. He was conscious of who he was. Did you see that as we unpack this passage? He was conscious of who he was. I must be in my Father's house. I must be in my Father's house. And he was conscious of what he had to do. I must be about my Father's business. See, Jesus knows who he is and what he has come to do. What about you? What about you? Jesus' mission is unique, and he is unique. But that doesn't stop us from asking those questions of ourselves. What about you? Do you know who you are and what you are here for? Can I suggest that what you do is not who you are. It's not who you are. It's what you do. Teacher, farmer, father, mother. It's not who you are, it's what you do. Great and important things. But if you're a Christian today, then who you are is a child of God, first and foremost, loved by God, who you can call your Father. Your Father through His indwelling Spirit. The gift that Jesus gives to His church, by which we cry, Abba, Father, our Father in heaven. If you're a Christian, that is who you are. You are a child loved by God, bought by Jesus with His precious blood on the cross, and filled with His Spirit, by which you cry, Abba, Father. That is who you are. Don't let what you do define you, because that will change. Whereas your identity in God will not, if He is your Father. And if He is your Father, then what are you here for? Well, you are here to serve Him. The most gracious and wonderful Father who you could ever wish for. And you get to serve Him. It is a privilege to serve such a Father. You might go, well, I don't want to serve that Father. Well, you will serve another Father. And I can guarantee you the Father you are serving is not as gracious and good as He is. Whether that be wealth, power, possessions, status. All those things promise much, but they fail to deliver. It is only God, who is the Father who can deliver on all His promises. And what you are here for is to serve Him, to be about the Father's business, your Father's business. And so at the beginning of the year, you can and should have certainty of your identity and purpose. Don't flounder around like a Christian wondering what you are here for and who you are. In Christ, you have a sure and certain identity and purpose. So get on with it in 2026. You see, who we are needs to be defined by our relationship with God, not with what we do for a living. So are you about your Father's business? For another 17 years, we read that Jesus went home to be the son of Mary and Joseph and submitted to his parents in the carpenter's house in Nazareth in daily life. Do you see, he went about daily life, as many of us will do in the year ahead. But underneath it all was a far greater calling and a far greater purpose. A more significant plan and purpose. because Jesus knew who he was and what he had come to do. How about you?